Hey guys, in this video I'm going to be building a simple web application using the Flask framework with Python. It's going to be an unscripted video, so feel free to follow along. I'm going to start from scratch. I'm going to build a Flask project and hope you guys will follow along. So the first step is always to create a folder. So I'm using Visual Studio Code. I'll navigate to the File tab and select Open Folder, and I'll go to my coding folder and then I'll create a new folder. So I'm going to call this new folder simple Flask app. Now after creating this folder, I'm going to select it and open it. Yeah, we are currently in our folder. Now the next thing I'm going to do is to create a virtual environment. So I'm going to go to terminal and I say new terminal. I open up the Visual Studio Code terminal. So now, depending on which operating system, you may have that various terminals you may choose from. I personally go with Git Bash. You can install it by installing Git for Windows. So first things first, there is create a virtual environment. Now I'm going to create a virtual environment that is going to separate my packages for this project from those that are within my system. So I'm going to do that by saying Python m, then I'm going to save them, and then I gave my environment name, so I'm going to call it env, and then wait for the virtual environment to be created. So our virtual environment is being created. So once our virtual environment is being created, we're going to have to activate it. Depending on which terminal you're using, you're going to be faced with a command such as source. So I'm going to use source since I'm using bash, so I'm going to use source. If you're using Windows, CMD or PowerShell, there are ways you can do that. However, for bash, it is using source. So I'm going to use source, then I say env, because that's a folder in which my virtual environment is in. So env, then I'm going to say script. Since I'm in Windows, it's going to create it as script. Then I'm going to call this file that's called activate. It's kind of like the executable we need to call to activate our virtual environment. So I'm going to activate my virtual environment, and just as you see here, we are inside our virtual environment. Now to confirm whether we are in our virtual environment, I'm going to say Python. Now we have in Python 3.9.2. However, you may have another version depending on which version of Python you're using. So I'm going to exit the shell by saying Ctrl Z and enter. I'm out of the shell. Now the first thing I'm going to do is to install Flask within this virtual environment. So I'm going to say pip install Flask, and Flask is going to install within our virtual environment. Yeah, after installing Flask within our virtual environment, I'll have to see whether it's installed by saying Python, and then I'm just going to say import Flask. Now, since we don't have any errors, we have Flask installed. So I exit the terminal, and I'm going to create a requirements.txt file in which I'm going to be able to freeze all my requirements while working with the application. So I'm going to say pip freeze, then requirements.txt. What this is going to do is to write the requirements for this application in a file called requirements.txt. If I run this, a file requirements.txt is going to be created within our folder. So if I be able to look into it, I have click, Flask, it's dangerous, Ginger 2 markup, safe and worksoap. These are the dependencies on each Flask runs. Now, having had Flask installed in our system, I'm going to create a file which I'm going to call app.py. Now, this is going to be the file that is going to contain our code for now. However, if we are to go further, we may choose to make our project grow larger and we may separate all our functionality. So the first thing I'm going to do is to import Flask. It's actually saying from Flask, import Flask. So I'm going to import a Flask class from Flask, and then I'm going to create an instance for it. So I'm going to say Flask underscore name, and then I'm going to create a simple route, which is kind of a URL. I'm going to say at app.route. So I'm going to enter in the URL, which is our index to our website. Then I'm going to add a v function to that. What a v function does is to take in a request and then return a response. Now in Flask, you always wrap the route. You decorate the view function with a view with your URL, just like I'm doing app.route, then the URL, and then I write a function that handles the request and returns a response. So I'm going to call my function index. Oh, sorry for that. So I'm going to call my function index and probably have an index that is going to simply return a string hello once we go to that. Now for me to run my server, I'm going to specify a condition that if underscore name is equal to underscore main, then we're going to run our application. So I'm going to run my app with app.run. So I'm going to save and come to my terminal. I'm going to run my app by saying python app.py. So our server is running and it's running at 0.5000. Now there's some things that you may see around here. We're having our environment as production. This is simply because you haven't specified it, which I'll show in a second. Then also debug mode is off. So it's also showing us that our server is being run at port 5000. So if I navigate to my browser and go to localhost 5000, I'll be able to see the request as hello. When I come back to my terminal, Flask has a very nice way of logging these requests in the terminal. So I'm having, this is a GET request, and it's returning a status code of 200 to the route of index. Now, if I want to create other routes, let me create another route, which is at app.route. I'm going to call this about, so I'm going to say about, and I say def. I'm just going to call it about, same thing, and I'm going to say return, let's call this about page. So if I go to my browser and say slash about, so if I go to the URL of our website slash about 404 not found, and this is because our debug mode is off. So if we switch it on, our server will be able to reload and even display nice errors on the front end. So let's go and set our debug mode to on. So as I see, I didn't specify anywhere that debug mode should be on. I can do this in many ways. I can say app dot debug equals true, or I can also say app.run, then I specify within the run function that debug is equal to true. So I'm going to stop my server and save this. Once I stop my server with Ctrl C, I'm going to rerun it. Let's see what happens. I'm going to say app.py. So I'm having my server running again, but this time it's running with debug mode on. So if I save, we're going to get about page. So if I go back to my home page, I have hello, and when I go to my about page, I have about. Good, this is working. Now we'll try doing some some other things, like what if we wanted to show a name within what if we wanted to get a variable within our URL and display it as a response? Let's see how they do that. So we're going to go to app.route, and then we're going to specify the URL. So let me say hello, provided you want to greet a name. So we'll specify the variable we want to get. Let me say we want the name, we specify it within this closing bracket, so the closing marks. Then we make a view function. So this view function is going to say greet. So I want to greet a person. Then we pass in the name from the URL. So we're going to say name. So we're going to say name, and then we pass in the name. So what we want to do is to return a greeting. So we're going to say going to return an f string. So that f string is going to be hello. Then it's going to be the name that comes from the URL. So if I save this, our server is going to restart. And if I go to localhost 5000 slash hello, so it's going to be hello, then slash Jonathan. So when you go to that, you see that you have hello Jonathan. However, we may also want to specify the type of the variables you would like to pass in as parameters in our URLs. So we do that by saying at app.route. So we specify that, let me say we want to to just return a number. Let's say age, so we want to return the age of a certain user. So we may say that we want to specify that the name of the user is an integer. So we may say the name is a string, so we may say string. Oh, sorry for that. We may specify that the name is a string, so we say string the name. So the name is going to be a string, and then we say that the age will be an integer. So when we say that the string will be a name and then the age will be an integer, then we can also say def show info. So we want to show information about a certain person, then we can say name and age, and then next thing we can return is return. So we'll return an f string, and it will have a name is, then we put the age, oh sorry for this, the age, then we say years old. So let's this working. We're going to save. We're having an error, lookup error. The converter age does not exist. Oh, was supposed to be int age. So let's save this and we run the server with python app.py. So when you go to our URL and you say, let's say we want to say we say in age slash, want to pass in the name Jonathan and the age 23. So it's going to return Jonathan is 23 years old. Cool, this is working. Now there will be instances in which we would like to render HTML instead of just rendering um, these strings as our responses. So that's what brings us to something called templates. Now, templates are the HTML part of our web applications that you may want to return to a user. For example, login pages, about pages, home pages. So instead of saying hello, we can return a template, we can return an HTML document. So let's see how we do this. We do this by creating a folder called templates. So I'm going to create a folder called templates right here. So I'm going to say templates. I'm going to create a templates folder, and then I'm going to put in my index files, index.html. I'm going to put in an index.html file. So index.html. I'm going to create a basic HTML file. So I'm going to call this simple application, and this simple application is going to have some dummy text. So I'm going to say lorem ipsum, just dummy text. Now, but if I want to render this, Flask comes with a special function called render template that enables you to render an HTML template. So I'm going to say from Flask import Flask, and I'm going to say render template. So in my view function, instead of returning a string, I can say return render template. Render template usually always takes in the the name of the HTML file we would like to render. So in this case, we want to render index.html. So when I save this and go back to my index, so I'm going to delete all this, go back straight to the index.html file. So we have our HTML file being shown, just like you saw. The title is simple application, and then you have some lorem ipsum text that's shown below. Then if we want to create an about template, we can do the same. So we can just say about the HTML, and we do the same thing. Let me say I'll call this simple application, then I also put just an h2 with about page, oh sorry for that. So I'm going to say about page, so save that. So if I go to my index, to my routes, and say instead of returning just about page, I can say render template, then I just pass in about HTML and save. So if I go to my localhost 5000 / about, I see about page. However, if you're noticing, there's something that is really funny here. We need a way to move to our template without having to go and then type the URL. So that brings us to what we call links. Now, if I want to link to various parts of our web app or various pages, I'll use links. However, we do that using anchor tags. So I'm going to create an anchor tag. So I'm going to say, I'm going to remove this lorem ipsum text. So I'm going to remove it. Then I'm just going to simply say we're going to have an h2 right here in our body. Oh, what is happening? So we're going to have an h2 that is going to have the home page of our application. So we're having a home page. So within our home page, we can have a nav bar. So we can say our nav has links that go to various sites. So I can say slash and then say this is going to be home. Can also say slash about. So this goes to the URL of about on our website. So, and I have that. So I can do the same thing here. Just copy and paste this nav bar and just put it here. Alright. So if I go back and refresh here, I have home and about. So if I go to home, that shows me to the home page, and then when I go to about, that shows me to the about page. However, this is kind of tricky because we have hard coded the URLs into our anchor tags. Flask has a function called URL4 that enables us to point to our view functions and then return the URLs that are attached to those view functions. So I'm going to say from Flask import URL4. From Flask import URL4. Now, I can also use this within my templates without even having to import it. So I can go to index.html, and instead of hard coding my URLs, I can say URL for, and I say the view name. So in this case, it's index. Now I can also remove this hard-coded URL and say URL for about, and I can copy this and paste it right in here. Remove this, just paste it with that. So if I go to my routes, if I go to home, I'm home. If I go to about, I'm at about. So basically this is how it works. Like if you want to create the various routes, you use the URL for function. Now if you've noticed some weird syntax in here, and this weird syntax is with double curly braces. Now these curly braces stand for what we call a templating engine. A templating engine simply helps us to bring some logic from our back end and then display it from the front end, help us to do stuff on the front end, help us to bring some logic of the server side to the front end. Now, Flask uses a templating engine called Ginger, and Ginger helps to provide just an easy syntax, just like you see when you use these double curly braces. This is what we call a variable. So basically, it helps us to represent a variable or make a function call or make an expression or do some logic within our front end. If you've noticed, we have some layers that some links, some parts of our websites that are being shared and are common to them. So we can create a way in which we can be able to have one layout for our web application, and this introduces us to template inheritance. So if I go to templates folder, I can say new file and then create my base.html. Now this base.html file is going to be able to this base.html file is going to hold a layout of our entire web application. Just like you see in our home page, you have a heading, a header. We also have a header for now. However, we can change this to what we may be able to extend or be able to inherit in all the templates. So I'm going to be able to just cut all of this. I'm going to cut everything and just go and put it in base.html. So what I'm going to do is to remove the name of the page, and so earlier.html currently has the nav bar only. So we may even create a footer. So I'm going to go to index.html and also remove everything. Now I'm going to create a much more organized layout of our website. So I'm going to say we have a nav, then we have a main section where all our application is going to be. Then you also have our footer, which is like this. Now we can put some corporate stuff within our footer, just like I can say copyright. Let's say simple, then you say 2021. So I'll save that. Now, just I've been talking about the Ginger 2 syntax. So I'm going to create a block of content. So this block is simply going to be the area in which all the code for our logic and other sections of our website is going to be. So I'm going to do that by writing block. I'm going to create two curly braces, and with those they'll have two percentage signs. So this is what we call a block in Ginger templating. So I'm going to say block and then give that a name. So I'm going to call it block content. And for every block I create, I have to end it. So I'm going to say end and content. So I've created that block, and in this block we're going to have our layout inheriting this base.html file, but everything will be under block. So let's try inheriting this layout. So I'm going to go to index.html, and the first line I'm going to write is extends. I'm going to say extends, then I specify the file I'm extending. So in this case, it's going to be this.html. Now I'm going to inherit from the template by saying block, and then I'm going to write two curly braces just like I did. So I'm going to say block, then I say content, and then I say end block content and save. So if I put some content just in here, just like h1 of hello world, and I can also put in some paragraph, which is this is the home page, and save. So if I go to my index.html and refresh, I have hello world. This is our home page. I have both a header, I also have a footer. So if I go to about.html, I'll do the same thing. I'll create a block which says extends, then I say base.html, and then I say block. I'll say block content. I'll have to use the same as I said here, block content and in block content. So I'm going to say block content so and end block content. So I'm going to save this and then do the same thing. I wrote h1. I'm going to say this is going to be, oh sorry for that, so going to be about page. So I'm going to write a paragraph that's going to say this is the about page. So right now we see I've created the about page. So if I save, try navigating here, when we go to the about page, you have the about page. However, the problem we are having here is that our work looks untidy, our HTML looks untidy. And if you're familiar with web development, we use CSS to provide some layouts, some styling to make our websites look nicer. So we're going to add some CSS to this website. The first step is going to be creating a folder called static. So I'm going to create a folder which I'm going to call static. Now this folder can have other static files such as JavaScript files, images, and fonts, etc. So I'm going to create, in the static folder, I'm going to create a folder which I'm going to call CSS. Then I'm going to create my main CSS file. So I'm going to create main CSS file like main.css. So after creating the main.css file, I'll put a basic rule such as for everything in our HTML, I'll just set the font size, the font family, sorry for that, to, let me say, we want to set it to Helvetica, Arial sans serif, which is that. When I save that, I need a way to see this on my front end. So what I'll do is to go to base.html, and the way we link CSS style sheets to our HTML is by saying link. So you specify a link that is of real style sheet. In this case, you specify where it's located. Normally, what we'll do is to just specify where the file is. However, when using Flask, we'll use a function called URL4, just like we did for the URLs. So in this case, we're going to say URL4, URL for, then we specify where our file is located. So in this case, our URLs for the static files are located within the static. Then you specify the file name, and the file name in this case is going to be equal to the location of the file. So you're going to say css/main.css save. Now, some of you will be asking, why do we say css/main.css? This is because this function looks for in the folder of static and then looks for the CSS file. But in this case, we specify the CSS file to be in the main folder, in the main.css, which is located in the CSS folder. So I am going to go and refresh. When I refresh within the browser, I will see that the font has changed. We can do other stylings as well. For example, we can say that we want our main section to be having a mean height of, let me say, 8 view height, 80 view height. So which makes it kind of longer. And if we want to like remove text decoration from all our links, we can say text decoration is none. So when we refresh, we'll see that our links have no text decoration. We can even say we want our nav to have a display of flex, and let's say justify content space between. So we can have our links being thrown at the sides of the navigation. You can also say padding as 20 pixels, and you say want the color to be white and the background color to be, let's say, Doja blue. So if we save and refresh this, we'll see that our nav bar has now turned into one that has a Doja blue background. However, I also need to remove this padding, so I'm going to say padding is 0, also specify margin is 0. So if I save and hard refresh on this, so I have my links, but my links are blue, I want them white. So just like the way you do CSS, I'm just going to come and say nav a. So nav a, then I specify the color as white. So we're having our links. This is our home, this is our about. We can do a lot of CSS, just like we can say, like for one, for the main to also have a padding of, let me say, 20 pixels. So we're having our CSS being shown, we're having our pages being shown with CSS. So when I navigate to home, I say hello world, this is our home page. If I go to about, I say this is our about page. Now in this, we've been able to learn how to create how to add CSS to our Flask application. Now we may want to also cover how we can be able to add things to databases. So Flask, as it cannot come with things to do with databases. For example, it does not have that layer of abstraction to help you work with databases. So that enables you to create a database of your own, to be able to play with a database of your own, to be able to play with a database kind of your own. And that is the beauty of using Flask. With Flask, you do not care that much about the technology you're going to use for your database and the rules you're going to use to configure certain things. Now that introduces us to what we call extensions. Now such extensions are those libraries, or they are those packages that help us to implement functionality that is not part of Flask, but in a way that sounds like Flask. So I'm going to introduce you to the Flask SQL alchemy, package that helps you to work with SQL databases with Flask. So I'm going to head over to stop my server. And when I stop my server, I'm going to pip install within my virtual environment. I'm going to pip install Flask SQL Alchemy. So after this being installed, I'm going to freeze it to my requirements.txt. So I'm going to say freeze and requirements.txt. And after freezing this, I'm going to go to requirements.txt and I'll see SQL Alchemy and Flask SQL Alchemy have been added. So in order for me to start using Flask SQL Alchemy, I'm going to first explain what Flask SQL Alchemy does. Flask SQL Alchemy is an extension that brings SQL Alchemy to Python, to the Flask framework. Now, SQL Alchemy is a database toolkit for Python for Python to work with SQL databases. Such databases include SQLite, MySQL, PostgreSQL, and Oracle. So for you to work with those, you'll need SQL Alchemy as long as you're working with Python. Now what Flask SQL Alchemy does is to bring SQL Alchemy to Python, which helps us to do object relational mapping. Now object relational mapping is a practice of us creating objects. These objects represent the rows, the different rows that are going to be in our database tables. Let's see this in action. So to get started with using Flask SQL Alchemy, I'm going to need to specify the database that I'm going to use. So for me to do that, I'm going to import SQL Alchemy. So I'm going to say from Flask SQL Alchemy, I'm going to import SQL Alchemy. And when I import SQL Alchemy, I'm going to be able to create an instance for it. So I'm going to say db is going to be equal to SQL Alchemy. So in most cases, in every case, you have to specify the app that is using SQL Alchemy. So I'm going to say our app is app. So app is app. So and save. So if I run my server again with Python app py, I'm going to see my server running, but then they're giving us a warning, just like you can see here. So the warning is this Flask what neither SQL Alchemy database URI nor SQL binds is set. So the default database is an SQLite database and is being kept in our memory. So that is not cool. What we need to do is to specify where our database is going to be. So I'm going to press Ctrl C to stop our server. Now I'll always have to set up where my database is going to be. So on my database, which is going to be an SQLite file to be located within my project folder. Now to do this, I'm going to need OS. So I'm going to import OS. I'm going to import OS and I'm going to create a variable called base_dir. And what base_dir is going to be able to do is to point to my current directory. So I'm going to say os.path. We're going to get the absolute path to the real path of this file. So I'm going to say os.path absolute path, which is going to be the absolute path, and you say os.path dot real path to the file underscore file. And when we do this, we are going to have our base da. So let me try by printing it. So I'm going to print new line, then I'll just print comma, I print the base da. So let's see this in action. If I put my server up again, I want to check out that. So it's going to be C users Jonathan blah 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 then app.py. So it's basically showing us the absolute path to our file. So if I want to see the folder in which we are currently in, I'm going to actually change this from absolute path to the name. So let's see this one. If I save, I am going to see it's C users Jonathan coding simple Flask app. This is the folder in which we are. Now for us to be able to add to show where we want our database to be, we'll have to join this path to our file of the database, to the file that we desire to call our database. So I'm going to create the app config. So Flask queries enables us to create configurations of our app using the config dictionary. So you always have to set it as app and dot config, then you specify the key of anything you may want to configure. So in this case, I want to specify the SQL Alchemy database URI. So I'm going to say SQL Alchemy database URI as equal to, then I specify, it always follows the conversion of you specify the database you're going to use, then you specify the driver. But since SQL Alchemy works direct with Python, we will not need a driver, so I'm going to say Sqlite. Then I specify where the file is going to be. So in this case, what I'm going to do is to just concatenate that to os.path.join. I'm going to join the base dar to the name of the database file we may want. So we're going to call this let's call it site.db. You can choose to call it db, you can even call it sqlite3. So when I save this, we're having another error that is saying that SQL track modifications add significant overhead and will be disabled in the future. Set it to true or false to suppress this warning. So we have to also set that up to prevent this warning. So I'm going to say app.config, and then I say SQL Alchemy track modifications, and I set it to false. So I'm going to set this to false and save. Now, just like we see in our terminal, the errors are gone. So we've been able to set up SQL Alchemy to work with our application. Now, the next thing is always to create a class which is going to model our database. So in this case, I'm going to create a simple file, a very simple file, which I'm going to call it, create a very simple model. And what this model is going to do is to represent our database table. I'm going to create that as, let me say, class of employees. So we're going to create an app of employees. So I'm going to say class of employees, and it's going to inherit from db.model. So what our model class is going to do is to represent how our database table for employees is going to be in our database. So in most cases, we have an ID, and this ID is a column, and being a column, it's db.column, and then it's going to be an integer, so it's going to be db.integer, and it's going to be a primary key, So we say primary key is going to be equal to true. Now primary key is equal to true. First thing we're going to do is to give our employee a first name. So we may say that their first name is going to be db dot column, and this will be db dot column db dot. This is supposed to be a string. You can pass in the length of that string. Let's say we want the first name to be 25 characters maximum. So we also say nullable is equal to false, just to set it to not null. So then we can also say last name is equal to db dot column, then we say db dot string, same thing as that. Let's say we want it to 25, and then we say nullable is equal to false. So just like we see here, we have our ID, which is being a column and an integer, so that first name is also a string of 25 characters. We also have their email, which is going to be equal to, so I'm going to just copy and paste this since it's almost the same. I'm going to copy this and paste it just here. Then I think these are what I'm going to basically store in the database. Now I'm going to create a function, so I'm going to call dev init. This will just be called every time we're going to create an object. So I'm going to say dev init self, and I'm going to minimize my terminal. So I'm going to say self dot first name is equal to first name. I actually have to pass them inside here, so I'm going to say first name, and then I say last name. I'm going to say last name, then I say email. So I'm going to say self dot first name is equal to first name, and self dot last name is equal to last name, and then self dot email is going to be equal to email. So I'm going to save this. Now I've been able to save this. Now I'm going to create my database. So to create my database, I'm going to open up my terminal. So terminal, and I'm going to press Ctrl and backtick so as to bring my terminal back. Now when I open my terminal, I'm going to stop my server. When I stop my server, I'm going to open Python shell. So I'm going to open Python within my virtual environment, and I'm going to say from app, we are referring to the app module app.py. I'm going to import my model, which is employee. I'm also going to import the DB. So I'm going to say from app import the SQL Alchemy instance, which is DB. So I'm going to say, oh, sorry for that. So I'm going to come and say from app imported DB, import DB. Now, for me to create my database, having specified where it should be and SQL Alchemy track modifications to false, I may also set up another config variable, which is app.config SQL Alchemy echo. I'm going to set this equal to true. Now you may ask, why am I choosing to set it to true? Is it necessary? Now it is important because it helps us to show the SQL commands that are being executed every time a transaction or each time we query a database when you're running our application, as you're going to see. So if I save, and I'm going to repeat this step, so I'm going to close my terminal and reload it. When I reload my shell, I'm going to say from app import db and import employee. So having imported that, to create my database, I simply run the command db.create all. So this function is run against the it's run on this SQL Alchemy instance and should be creating our database. So just like you see here, having set SQL Alchemy equal to true, we are able to see the schema of our database. So we are seeing the command as create table employee with ID integer not null, first name varchar 25 not null, last name varchar 25 not null, email varchar 25 not null, and primary key as ID. So our database has been created. For us to get a visual representation of that, I have a tool called DB browser for SQLite, which we may look and install. So I'm going to open it up and say open database. So I want to browse to where my application is. I'm going to go to my locations, users, and Jonathan, and then my coding folder, and simple. Then I open my database. So when I check, I have one table, which is employee. Now if I go to browse data, I have ID, first name, and last name. We do not have anything in our database for now. So what I'm going to do is to minimize this, and within our terminal, I'm going to be explaining how Flask SQL Alchemy works. Now, since we have our employee model right here, which we have also imported within our shell, we can even be able to populate our database right down here. Now what I'm going to do is to say, I'm going to create a new employee object. So I'm going to say new employee is going to be equal to, I say employee, then I say the first name is going to be equal to Sally, then I say the last name is going to be equal to Jonathan, and then the email is going to be equal to Sally Jonah at gmail.com. So I've been able to create an employee object. However, this employee object has not yet been saved to the database. So I need to call some commands, some functions, some methods on this on the DB instance. So I'm going to say db.session.add, then I add the new employee, and this has not yet added them to the database. This simply adds them to the SQL Alchemy session. So if I say db.session.commit, I'm going to say db.session.commit. So when I do this, we see that SQL that has been executed is insert into employee blah blah blah. So it inverts the values. The values are specified within the object. So this is how object relational mapping works. We basically create instances of our model. Those instances, while saved to the database, form rows. So if you want to query the database, for example, if you want to find out whether there is a certain user with certain credentials, we may say user is equal to, let's say, employee. Want to get an employee, so we say dot query dot get, then you specify the ID of that employee. So I may say get ID is equal to 1. So let's try this. So the saying got an expected argument ID. So what we're going to do is use another method. So I'm going to say user is equal to employee query dot get, let's say first name is equal to, let me say, Sally. So if I run that, still they're saying that keyword argument. So let us try another method. So I'm going to say user is equal to employee dot query dot filter. So this time we want to filter by, let's say we want to filter by first name. First name is equal to, say, Sally. And then filter by name. First name Sally. Then you want to say dot first. Dot first applies when you want to search for the first person with that. So we are selecting Sally. So we're saying select employee, just like you see this SQL alchemy command. So we are not having any. So if I go to the database and I try to refresh, see I have one that has Sally. So let's see what went wrong. We said we wanted to filter by name, by first name equals Sally dot first. So if we call our user, so we have employee one. However, this returns it in a way that is not friendly to us. If we want to search, if we want to be able to see the database representation of our names, we can write a method in our class which we can call def repre. So it's going to be repre and self. So then I'm going to return an f string containing the database object. So I'm going to say employee. Then I say their first name. So I'm going to say employee first name. So this has to be self dot first name. So let's see this in action. I'm going to go outside, then open this. I'm going to also say from app import db and employee. So I'm going to create a new user. So I'm going to say new employee is going to be equal to employee, an employee with a username. With a first name, an employee of first name equals to John, and let's say last name equal to Doe, Let's say they have an email of John Doe at gmail john@gmail.com. Now we have to save this, so I have to say db.session.add, and I say new employee, and then I say db.session.commit. So we have created another user, another employee in our database. So if I want to query for all the employees in our database, all I have to say is employee dot query dot all. So I have employees as employee John and employee Sally. So these are the two I have in our database. Even if I go to my employee table and I try to refresh, I have these two in my database. So we have successfully been able to create things in our database. However, if you want to search for one, so if I want to search for one employee, I can be like employee dot query dot filter by. This is in case I want to filter by a certain attributes the class has. Let me say email. So I can say filter by email is equal to, let's say, John Doe at gmail.com. So we want to search for the first person with that email. So we say first. So we see employee John. However, if you want to search for many employees, you can say employee.query filter by, let's say, email is equal to John Doe at gmail.com. So if we search for that, we see that we have a base query object. So this is probably an SQL alchemy object. So we need to create a method that simply specifies what we need. So I'll say employee.query filter by let's say email is equal to John Doe at gmail.com. Then we say .all, want to return a list of them. So since it's the only one in the list, it's going to return employee John. So what if we want to update an object, an employee? Let's say I want to update their first name, their last name, or their email. The thing we're going to do in this case is I'm going to to call an employee. So I'm going to say employee dot query filter by, let's say, first name is equal to Sally. Then it's going to be dot first. So I want one person, so I'm going to save dot first. So if I call employee, so it's employee Sally. If I want to update their name or their email, I'll say employee dot first name, then I say is equal to let's say Judas. So if I say their first name is equal to Judas, all I have to do is to say db.session.commit, and that will be changed. So if I call emp, I have employee Judas. If I call emp dot first name, I have his name as Judas, not Sally. So if I want to delete this employee, all I have to do is to say db.session.delete the employee and db.session.commit. So this has deleted the employee from our database. So if I were to refresh the site, I don't have the employee is gone. If I want to check from the terminal whether he is gone, I'll just say employee dot query all, and we don't have any. We have employee John. So we have been able to learn how object relational mapping works, simply creating objects, and those objects stand for whatever rows we may have in a database table. So we can also create relationships, something I'm not going to get into right now, but if you want, you can suggest it down in the comment section. You can tell me to do a video on why I create relationships. However, let's go on. So we've been able to do CRUD operations. Now we're going to transition to building this on the client side. Yeah. Now I'll restart my server. So I'll say Python okay, and the server is up and running. Now since the server is up and running, I'm going to navigate to my to my front end. So I have the home page, also have the about page. Now, one thing I'd like to do is to create a simple application that does describe functions on the client side. Now I'm going to get rid of some of the HTML. So I'm going to just delete some of this HTML. Now, what I'm going to do is to just create a table. So I'm going to create a table. So this is going to be a table, and this table is just going to have a table head. It's the employee name. So I'm going to say the first table is going to be ID, and the next is going to be first name, and the next thing is going to be the last name. So we're just going to show the database representation in our front end. Now we are going to create also a table body. So I'm going to say tbody, and tbody, and we're going to say rows. Then we are going to write rows, and then we're going to do tables, columns in these rows. Now, one thing we can do is to dynamically display this data from our database. So what we'll have to do is to write the database query in our views. So we are having all this being, we want to render all this on our front end in the HTML. So what I'm going to do is to go to app.py, and then go to app.py, and then go to index. Then inside here I'm going to say employees. I'm going to create a variable called employees as employee query, since you want to see all the employees in our database. Now, if I want to show these employees on my side, I'll have to create what is called a context. A context is just a dictionary of those variables that you may want to see on our front end. Now, for me to create that context, I'm going to say context, and it's going to just be a dictionary. What it's going to have is, first thing it's going to have is employees. So I'm going to say employees, and these employees are just going to stand for this object that represents a query to our database. So it's going to be employees. Now, when we do this, we are going to call this context within render template as, so I'm going to just say star context. This just exposes the context to our template. Now, if we go inside our index.html, we've created a simple table that's supposed to show our employees. Now, we need to show the employees' first name, last name, and email. Now, what I'll have to do is to use a for loop, something I did not talk about. A for loop in Jinja is written like this. You write double curly braces, just like how you write a block, and you say for whatever you want in the collection you want. So in this case, we want employees in employees. I'm going to say employees, then going to write end for. So I'm going to come and say end for. Then I'm going to basically say for employee in employee, and then create, oh sorry for that, I need to just create a row, and in this row I'm going to create a table data, and in this table data I'm going to write, using Jinja syntax, I'm going to enter a variable. This variable is going to be employee dot first name. Actually, it's ID first, so I'm going to say employee dot ID. Oh, sorry for that. I'm going to say employee dot ID. Then the next thing is going to be employee dot first name. This is going to be employee dot first name. Then the next thing is going to be employee dot first the last name. So we have the employee dot first name, employee dot last name, and employee dot first name. Another field we forgot to show is the email, so I'm going to add it as email. Then I'm going to come and say employee dot email. So and save. So if I go back to my front end, hope it works. I refresh and I go to home. So I have all this data being dynamically shown from the database. However, I may want to add some styling to that table. So what I'm going to do is to say to come to my style sheet, and then I save for all th want the width to be 200 pixels. Now if I go and say I've had all the th have 200 pixels as their width. I would also want then to have a border of 1 pixel solid, and then let me just say black. So if I refresh, they have a border, and can also just put the same thing for table data. So I say table data, then that. So I also just put some padding, some extra padding. Forgive me guys, this is unscripted coding. So I'll say padding 20 pixels. So come and say padding 20 pixels. So we basically have this information being displayed from the database. So now we have our employee being shown. So what I want to do is to create a route that takes us to where we create them, where we update them, and where we delete them. Now I'm going to change the about route to one that takes us where we are to add items. So I'm going to go to base.html and just say add employees, and then so I'm going to come and create that route. So I'm going to come and change the about route. So I'm going to call it add.html. Even the add.html, I'm going to create a route which I'm going to call add.html. So I'm also going to say to change this from about to add employee, and add employee, and I'm going to change this to add employee and add HTML. So I'm going to create that template right here in my template. I'm going to say I'm going to create a new file which I'm going to call add.html. Same thing is going to extend from extends base.html. It's going to extend base.html. Then I'm going to also write a block. So block content, then end block content, and then save. So if I try to go to my base.html, so instead of writing about, I'm going to say URL for the function add employee. So I'm going to copy this. So I'm going to say my base.html is going to be URL for add employee. So I save. So if I refresh, it's going to be add employees, which we can navigate to. I want to create a form. Now that leads us to creating forms that submit data to the database. So now I'm going to come and add the HTML. I'm going to create a simple div which is .form. And inside this, I'm going to create a form. Now this form is the most important part of a form that helps us to submit data, helps us to determine which method the form is using. So in this case, we want to create a form with a method of post. Now, a form always has an action and a method. An action usually refers to that backend that does the function of the form. In case we want to submit data to the database, that function that leads to the data being stored in the database is what we put in the action. In this case, we're going to specify that is going to be URL for it's going to be URL for add employee. Now, after doing that, I'm going to come and add some inputs and some labels. So I'm going to say form group. I'm going to add them as form group. So I'm going to create the form group. So I create a label, and this label is going to be for first name. So it's going to be for first name, and then I'm going to just put first name. Then I'm going to create another input. So this is going to be an input of type text, and it's going to have a name of first name. And then I'm going to copy this for the last name too and the email. So I'm going to do paste, and then I'm going to have this as last name. Something I can do with this paste call. I'm highlighting what I want to duplicate, or highlighting what I want to highlight. Then I just write last name, and then going to do the same thing. In this case, I'm going to do first name and then highlight, and then just replace it with any. If you're wondering how I'm doing it, I'm doing Ctrl D. So when I highlight email and I do Ctrl D, it's going to highlight other emails that are found in the document. Now, we have our three fields. We have first name, we have last name, we have email. All we need now is a submit field. So I'm going to create a submit field. So don't mind about the styling. I'm just doing unscripted coding. And if you have any comments, please leave them in the description. Leave them in the comment box below. If you like this video, please go ahead and like it. Subscribe to the channel. Help me grow as a person. So I'm going to create an input of type submit. This is going to be a button. So I'll have to specify a value for it. So the value in this case is going to be add employee. So we're going to add an employee to this database. Now, when we go to our add, so we have our fields as this, as ugly as they look. I have to style them a little bit. Now I'm going to give CSS styling to the font. So I'll start with div of class of form. So I'm going to say dot form. I'm going to give it a width of 50%, the margin of auto, just to make it stick in the middle. I'm also going to say dot form, every input found within form. So I'm going to say the form input, just say width is equal to 100%. Let's see how that works. So we're going to have something like that. Now we're also going to style dot form group. So form group, and within our form group, we're going to just say padding is going to be equal to 20 pixels. Now, padding is going to be equal to 20 pixels, which is going to look something like this. Then, when we style the inputs, we can also say that we want them to have padding of 5 pixels and border radius of, let's say, 7 pixels, just to make it look better. So if I refresh, we have something like this, which is not looking good. So we also add a border color. So you say border border color as let's say light gray, and have something that looks like this. Something that works, something that we can use. Alright, so we can also actually remove the outline. We can say outline as none. So if we click on them, don't have any outline. Now I also need to style the input of button. Let me give it a class. So I'm going to give it a class of, let me just give it a class of my button. And when I come inside here, I'm going to just style it up very fast. I'm going to come and say my button. So I'm going to say color is white. Let's say border is none, color is white. Let's say border is none. And then I say background, color is Dodger blue. So I'm going to say Dodger blue and give it a border radius. So I'm going to say border radius as 7 pixels. So I have something like that. Also going to give it a width of let's say width of 50%. Yeah, so give it a width of 50%. Didn't work. So let me see what is going wrong. If I go to add the HTML, I'm having ID input of submit, class of my btn, value of that. So let me give it some padding. So I'm going to say padding 20 pixels. So if I save, it's not working. Oh, didn't save. So if I save, padding is 20 pixels. So let's see how this is. So having color white, background color that, the radius is that. Okay, so we have a problem here. If I say input type is equal to submit. So when you have a type equals to submit, then I say width is going to be equal to 50%. Let's see how this is going. So we have it like that. Good. And you can say margin is auto. I want to place it in the middle. It's not going to work. Oh no, what are we doing? Okay, let's just say has a margin of 20 pixels just to cheat the system. So we have it like that. You can even give it some padding of 20 pixels. By the way, CSS is hard. Please leave your comment in the description, in the comment section. So we're having our form that we expect to submit data to our database. Now we can also add a heading to it just to make sure that we have something that works. So can say add an employee. So we have that, add an employee. So we can go home and then we say add employee. So we can add an employee. When you add, we redirect to a page that shows that we've added an employee. Now let's work on that. Now when you put this data into the form, we expect this data to be submitted to our database when we submit. However, when you see we have method not allowed for the requested URL, now we have to specify the method on our view function. So you need to go to add, and in the decorator, just after slash add, we're going to add another argument which is going to call methods. Sorry for that. So I'm going to add the methods In this case, I'm going to add methods of get, so it can accept get methods, and post can also do post method. Now if I save, server is going to reload and I refresh, it's going to tell me to resend. Now when I resend, the data is being posted to 200 to is being posted to the /add and with a status code of 200. But if we want to print that form data, I need to be able to get that data in form of variables. So what I'm going to say is first name is going to be equal to request dot form dot get, then I specify first name. Then if I say print, I'm going to print first name and save. If I try again, let's say first name is equal to Jonas, second name is equal to Jerry, and this has to be email. This is what occurs when you do coding unscripted. So I'm going to say this is email, this is also have to be email. If I add the email and save, so let me cancel and refresh this with get. So I'm going to just redirect here, come back. I see name request is not defined. So each time we're dealing with request, we want to access the data, we want to access what is being passed within a request. So we need to use the Flask request object. Now we're going to do that by importing it from Flask. So I'm going to say from Flask import request. I'm going to come and say request.form.get. This won't give us an error this time. So if I refresh, I have my form. I'm going to say Sally, and I say let me just call him Trevor, and the email is going to be Sally Trevor at gmail.com. So if we add an employee, we are having our first name being printed to the terminal. Now this means you can also get our last name. So we're going to say last name is going to be equal to request form get, then last name. So this is going to be request form get last name. And when we get the last name, what we want to do is to create another employee. We're also going to be able to get the email. We want to be able to get the email. So we're going to say email is going to be equal to request.form.get. Then we want to get the email. In this case, we want to get the email which is from the website, want to get an email which is from the form on the front end. Now we want to specify that if a request.method is equal to post, we want to get all these variables and then store in the database. So what I'm going to do is to cut this and then specify that if request.method is equal to post. What does this mean? This means if data is coming from the front end and then going to the back end, what you're going to do is just get these variables. I'm going to do the indentation here. After doing the indentation, I'm going to create a new employee out of this data. Now to create a new employee, just like I showed you, you create a new object. So I'm going to say new employee is going to be equal to an employee with first name equals to first name. The first name equals to a first name, and the last name equals to the last name. And you also have to specify that the email is going to be equal to the email. Now simply add to the session with db.session dot add, sorry for that, db.session dot add, and you say new employee, and you say db.session dot commit. So Then I save that. Now, what we need is also redirect to a page. Flask comes with a function called redirect that helps you to redirect to different pages. So I'm going to say on Flask import redirect. I'm going to come and just after adding it to the database, we're going to redirect to URL for the index. So we are going to redirect to index after adding the data to the database. Okay, let's see this in action. So if we refresh, we are going to add some data in here. So I'm going to say Jerry and add mouse, and then you're going to say Jerry mouse at gmail.com. So if I say employee, you see it is adding 200, but it's not redirecting, and this because we have to terminate this by saying return redirect URL for index. So let's try it again. So if we say Alex, then it's put in Johnson and put in the email. So we say Alex Johnson at gmail.com. So if I submit this, it's going to redirect and all our data is going to be in our tables. So we're having data being dynamically shown to us within the table. So if we want to update this, what are we going to do? I'm going to create 2 extra buttons for updating and deleting this data. So what I'm going to do is to go to my index.html where we have the table and add 2 extra fields. So I'm going to say td, and it's going to have a link that leads to the update page, and then you have a link that enables us to delete. I'm going to say delete, and so we are having extra links that are to take us to the update and the delete routes. Now let's create the update route. To create the update route, what we're going to do is to go to app.py, and we are going to create a route. So I'm going to come and say at app.route app.route. So I'm going to say slash update. So the process of updating works in this way. You get an object with an ID, then you get it by its ID, then you update it and save it to the database. So what we're going to do is to say update slash int. We're going to get ID. So now what we're going to do is say def, the view function is going to be def update. So def update employee, and this is going to take in the ID of the employee. Now we're going to create a variable that's going to stand for the employee with that ID. So I'm going to say employee to be updated is going to be equal to employee.query dot get 4404. Then you pass in the ID, so it's going to be ID. Now when we do this, we have to return and render template. So what we want to render is update.html. We're also going to create a context because we will need it in this case. So I'm going to say context is going to be a dictionary. In this case, we're going to have employee as employee to be updated. Then you pass that context just inside our render template. So next thing is going to be creating that template. So I'm going to come to update.html, then just say new file and then say update.html. So I'm going to copy the HTML for the ad. It's going to be the same. However, a few things are going to change. Now in the update.html, I'm going to copy paste all this. Then instead of having a form action as add employee, this case is going to be update. So let me see where I'm right. It's going to be update employee. So if I say update, it's going to be update employee. So being update employee and with a method of post, now all we have to do is to add the values of that employee. So if I say value for the first name is going to be, since we specified it as part of our context, we are going to have employee dot the first name. Then we're also going to have value as employee dot last name, and the value of this is going to be, oh, we already have a value for the employee. So we have email is where we're supposed to put a value, so it's going to be value as so it's going to be employee dot email, and I'm saving this. So if I go to this and refresh, now I have to link the index.html to that update. Now you need to say slash update. So I can say URL for, then I pass in update employee. I can even specify the ID as, so I can say ID is equal to employee.id, something like that. So it's going to be ID is equal to, then I say employee dot ID, and then save. So if I save, I'm going to say update. So routing error, update employee. Did you forget to specify values ID? Oh, so I am going to specify the ID. So URL for update employee, then employee.id. So for now, let me try using this. If you can help, briefly comment in the comment section below. So I say update slash ID just to point to its ID. So I'm going to say employee dot ID, save. So I'm going to refresh and add. So where is the problem? If I say update slash 2, and let's try to check where the error is. Context base.html update employee. This is failing to work because we specified it here. It's actually not my mistake, I realized. So if I fix this and make it this, it's probably going to work. However, if I go, I'm going to get an error when I go to update because the form has update but doesn't have an ID specified. So I'll have to specify it by saying ID is going to be equal to employee.id and save. Now when I refresh, we have a form with the data for a particular employee. Now I'm also going to change the add employee to update. So I'm going to send this and say update. Now if I refresh, then I have update, and if I go back, I have this. So if I go to Jerry, I'll go to Jerry mouse, and all the details of Jerry mouse will be here. If I go to Alex, I go to update, and I have Alex Johnson's details here. Now one thing I would like to do is to be able to save updated information to the database. So what I'm going to do is to come to my app.py, and then specify that employee be updated dot first name, employee to be updated first name is equal to, it's going to be equal to request form dot get, then we're going to get a first name. So this basically means that the employee to be updated, the new information for the employee to be updated is going to be the information from the form on the front end for this view. Then the next thing we're going to say is employee to be updated last name, employee updated last name is going to be equal to request dot form dot get, then we're going to get last name. So having had that, we're also going to do it the same for the email. So the email is going to be equal to request dot form dot get the email. Now once you have this set, what we're going to do is to just say db.session.commit, then we save, and let's see how this is going to be. Now if we go to update, oh, not now constraint failed, because say db.session.commit. Alright, so let's try to fix our code. We did not specify method, so let's try to do that. So I'm going to say I'm going to specify methods as get and post. Then methods as get and post. So when you have that, we can say we can actually specify our method to be post, that if it's a method of post, we can have this. So I can say if request dot method is equal to, if request dot method is equal to post, then we're going to do the following: db.session.commit, and then what we'll do is to turn to return and redirect to URL for index. Let's see whether this is going to work. So if I go to if I go back to update and refresh, if I go to update 2, if I go to and change the name to Dorothy, if I change, so the name has changed to Dorothy. Let's try to update the email. So if I change this to John Doe to John Dorothy and say that, so we have our information being updated successfully. Now we also want to create delete functionality. So we're going to create a route for deleting. So we're going to come and say app.route So we're going to say this is going to be delete, same thing as the one for update. We're deleting one that has a specific ID. So we're going to say delete and delete employee. So we're going to delete an employee with an ID. Now, first things first, we're going to get the employee's ID, the employee with that ID. So we're going to say employee. So we're going to say employee with employee to delete. Employee to delete is going to be equal to employee dot query dot get or 404 ID and employee to delete is that. So after getting that, we're just going to say db.session.delete, then employee to delete, and after deleting the employee, we are going to commit to the database. So db.session.commit, and redirect to actually return redirect. So we're going to say return redirect and say URL for URL is going to be equal to index. So let's see that in action. Next thing is going to be specifying the URL within our index. So I'm going to go to index and then specify the URL just in here. So I'm going to say URL for this is going to be delete employee and then specifying the ID as employee. Sorry for that, employee dot ID. So save and refresh. So I have my application. So on deleting, I have to get rid of one. So I see that the employee has been deleted and delete. So we don't have any. I also want to create a condition that shows that in case we don't have any employee, we display that we don't have an employee. So I'm going to remove this table and say if employees, then we'll display the table. Then what if we don't have employees? Let me first fix this HTML. So I'm going to come and push that slightly inside. Then I say it's going to be else. So with else, I need to say it's going to have a small paragraph. It's going to say there are no employees. So with an href of adding, so I'm going to say it's going to add so I'm going to say URL for, then check for that function. It's going to be add employee. So I'm going to say URL for add employee. So I'm going to say add one. So if I refresh, we have this. So if I say add one, I go to add. I say rad. Let me say rad Jordan, and then say Jordan at gmail.com. So if I add, I have Brad Jordan being added. If I want to update, let me say Brad Jordan. Let me say tall. If I add, it's being updated to Jordan tall. And if I delete, it's being deleted. Now we have one problem. All of our database stuff is happening, but we are not getting a suitable way of showing our messages. So Flask comes in with a function called Flash that helps us to do search messages. So I'm going to go to Flask and then say from Flask import Flash and save. Now when I save, I'm going to have to flash these messages. Now for every transaction that I do, I want to flash these messages. So what I'm going to do is to come where I save an employee to the database, db.session.commit. I'm going to say flash, then the message. So I'm going to say flash, flash the message. So I'm going to say flash employee successfully. Employee added successfully and save. Now I'm going to also come to update and I say a flash and I say employee info updated. Then I'm also going to flash in the delete employee. So I'm going to flash so it's going to be employee deleted and save. So now when I come just here, I'm going to delete this because you do not need these routes. So I'm going to delete all of the server and we are going to have our basic CRUD routes. So when we have these messages being flashed from the server side, we need a way to represent them on the front end. Now what I'm going to do is to create a div with that is going to be able to alert all these when you create them. So I'm going to use a with tag. So I'm going to say with messages as get messages equals to get flashed messages. I'm going to say end with now messages as get flash messages. So we're going to store all our messages as get flash messages, which is a function that gets our flash messages. So when we call this function being, sorry for that, so I'm going to open my code. Oh yeah, coding is really tedious. So okay, so I'm going to run my server. So I'm going to say python app and so we were just in here. So I was saying that with messages equal to get flash messages, which means you are getting the flash messages and then you're displaying them on the client as messages. So I'm going to say if there are any messages, so I'm going to say if, sorry for that, I'm going to say if messages. So I'm going to say and if. So this is going to be an if messages. We're going to say and if. Then we're going to create a for loop. So I'm going to say for. So I'm going to say for messages. What you want to actually do is to message in messages. We want to end for. So we want to create a paragraph. So I'm going to create a paragraph. So I'm going to create a paragraph. This paragraph is going to have the message. So I'm going to say message, and then I'm going to give it a class of alert just to be distinct. So I'm going to come to CSS and then specify the alert class. I'm going to say dot alert, and then I give it a padding. What is that? So padding over 20 pixels, and then I'm going to give it a background over light green and a color of green. So let's see this in action. So if I add an employee right here, add an employee, let's say Lois, then you put Len, then you put Lois Len at gmail.com, and you save. So the say intersection is unavailable because no secret key was set. Wow, I forgot to set a secret key. Let's do this. So now what I'm going to do is to go to app.py, and when I go to app.py, I'm going to configure that. So I'm going to say app.secret key, then I specify the secret key. This secret key should be kept secret, but for the purpose of this tutorial, we're just going to keep it public. However, I'll teach you how to keep them separate. So just going to keep it to any random string and save. So this should be kept secret, and by being secret I mean it's supposed to be secret, but for the purpose of learning we're not keeping it secret. So if I save and I resend, so we're having employee added successfully. Wow, our thing is working. So if I go and say Lois Lane Superman, then I update employee info updated. So if I go and then say change this to, let me say Bruce, then say let me say Bruce, then put Wayne. So I want to also like change this to Bruce Wayne at gmail.com. So we have Bruce Wayne, info is updated successfully. So let's see why our message is not showing as expected. So we have P with alert, we have this. So try to hard refresh, go back. So Bruce, if I say Bruce Batman Wayne, oh sorry for this, and I say update, so we have an info updated. So we are having the flash messages being shown up here. So if we delete, we have employee deleted. If we add, let's say JSON, let's say Stanton, then you say JSON at json.com. So if we add, we have employee added successfully. So guys, thank you for watching all this time. I've been able to do this tutorial unscripted, and we've been able to work from minute 1 up to the last minute until we came up with this simple application. So feel free to comment in the comment section down below, and feel free to subscribe to my channel. I'll be doing such videos to build projects from scratch just for the purpose of teaching a beginner. My name is Jonathan, and if you feel you've gained value from this, please like and share with your friends. Thank you for watching.